Chapter 121, The Plan. Hearing Essie's confirmation, and the fact that our targets were all younglings, I had a general idea about the situation at hand. Those younglings should be Ember's siblings. I didn't know if attacking them head-on was the smart thing to do, especially since they held the home advantage, not to mention the absence of an adult dragon. Recalling how our parents were missing as well, I roughly guessed that there must be some sort of meeting or whatnot that required the adults to attend, leaving us younglings behind. Though technically, I'm not sure I can still be considered as a youngling, I inwardly mumbled. With my sudden increase in size and the fact that I already finished my rite of passage, I should somewhat be considered a grown-up. My thoughts wandered as we followed the less of the wind under Essie's guidance. Imi and Cidus, who were flying by side, suddenly drew closer. Imi was the first one to speak. "Brother, I'm sure you already noticed, but it seems like we are heading straight to their nest," she said with a hesitant face. Cidus continued with a serious expression. Had it been any other time, I would have mocked her for being a coward, but she's right. No matter what, I don't think it's wise to fight them there. Imi completely ignored the first part of what he said before adding, "I'm not concerned about the younglings, we can take care of those, no problem. While you brother take care of this, Ember," she said with a flash of confidence passing through her eyes before continuing, "My main concern is the adult dragon coming back suddenly only to find us wreaking havoc in his or her home." Nodding, Cidus added, "There's always the possibility of not only one but two adult dragons," he said in a solemn tone. Hearing what they said, I slowly nodded. I was honestly impressed. I didn't think they'd take all of this into consideration, and was considering how I should take care of this and make them understand, so seeing them still cautious despite the rage that bubbled inside, I felt strangely proud. Glancing below me, Enos was soaring through the sky with a bloodthirsty grin plastered on his face. A sigh escaped my mouth. Well, at least he didn't rush ahead alone like before, so progress, I guess. I inwardly mumbled before turning to Imi and Cidus. Although adults are not supposed to meddle in the affairs of the younglings, it would be a different matter if we were directly attacking their lair, so our best course of action would be to lure them out of it. I spoke in confidence. Cidus and Imi nodded in understanding, as if they had long since expected my answer before asking, "Do you have any plans on how to lure them out, brother?" asked Cidus, while Imi listened carefully. A chuckle escaped my mouth as I glanced downwards towards the golden dragon that didn't seem to care about anything else. "Haha, that's easy, we release Enos," I grinned. "Our release? Enos?" Imi stuttered uncharacteristically in confusion. Cidus was no better as he glanced about in surprise. "What do you mean, brother?" he asked. "Ember is a very arrogant fellow, even back in the naming ceremony. It's like he can't stand not being the number one whenever he goes. He is strong, I admit, but very rash," I said while shaking my head. Imi paused for a second before asking, "If so, why send Enos and not you, brother?" I'm afraid he won't show up if he knows I'm here. The last time we fought, he almost lost his life, though he could have already moved past that and might even want a rematch. I don't want to risk anything, so Enos will lure him out of the lair. The other younglings will follow after him, that's almost certain," added Imi. Grinning, Cidus continued, "And we take care of them all in one full swipe." Hearing that, I replied calmly, "I don't care about the rest, Ember is mine." My siblings nodded in understanding before Imi asked in a whisper, "How are we going to get Enos to follow the plan? He might consider it to be too cowardly, and say something along the lines of how we should just crush them head on, no matter the place," agreed Cidus. I was about to reply when Essie, who was quiet all this time, spoke for the first time. "See, can you leave that to me?" Smiling gently, I replied in an encouraging tone, "Sure." Nodding, she slowly stood up and jumped from atop my head before flying towards Enos and settled atop his. He seemed a little surprised at her sudden appearance as he reined in his bloodlust and tried to appear more gentle before speaking in a somewhat awkward manner. "Oh, are you okay, Essie?" he asked, to which she nodded before replying in a cheerful tone, "I'm better now." Nodding approvingly, Enos continued, "That's good. Of course, you are not so weak that some bastard named Ember can handle you. HMPH, he must have used some dirty methods, otherwise, how could he even catch you in the first place? Despicable, just his name is despicable enough," he grumbled. "Brother Enos, you know he was named by the king, right?" whispered Essie as her eyes darted about nervously. Hearing that, Enos' body shuddered as he replied, "Oh, of course, it's the person that's the most despicable. How could he defile the sacred name the king gave him by fighting without honor? TSK, he brings shame to his name and does not deserve it," he said, to which Essie chuckled brightly. Yes, he is very despicable, brother Enos, that's why I want to pay him back for what he did to me," she suddenly said, her tone extremely serious as she spoke, causing Enos, who was about to reply, to halt before he slowly nodded. "What do you want me to do?" he asked. Please lure him out of his cave and help brother Cidus and sister Imi take care of the other younglings. The sky is my domain, so it's disadvantageous for me if we fight inside, she explained, to which Enos nodded in understanding. It's your fight, little sister. I'm only here to help you get your revenge. Don't worry, I'll get that shameless bastard out of his hole, he said reassuringly, to which Essie smiled brightly before answering. Thank you, brother Enos. Saying that, she swiftly hopped off from on top of his head and flew towards us before settling on top of mine. Not bad, I muttered. Brother Enos is very nice, he just doesn't know how to express himself very well, explained Essie with a sweet smile, causing me to pause in surprise. Before I could say anything else, Imi's voice reverberated in my ears. We arrived. Chapter 122, Battle Start. Glancing at the scenery before me, I momentarily paused a few kilometers away from our target, another large gray mountain, though this one was not a floating one, but more of a simple one devoid of any sort of vegetation. It reminded me of the place where we were born. The gray desolate mountain stood in the middle of a large clearing. The land surrounding it was equally devoid of any forms of life, with the ground charred black. This made me frown, as the area was lacking in water mana. Add to that the abundance of fire mana. Should we move a bit closer, Ember would surely notice us, hence why I paused a distance away first. Under my lead, everyone silently landed in the thin forest below. Enos was the first one to speak as he stepped closer to me. I just need to lure this Ember bastard out of his hole, right? He asked, to which I nodded in confirmation before adding. Yes, but do not engage, just taunt him and try to get him to move out of that area, I said while motioning towards the charred ground in front with my head. Nodding, Enos replied. I know, brother, I may not be the smartest, but I'm not stupid. It will be hard for me to fight him head on over there, especially with all the fire mana in the area, he said with a grumble. Good, don't worry too much about it. You'll get your chance to fight. Ember is also accompanied by his siblings. If he gets out, then without a doubt they will as well. By then, I glanced at Cidus, Imi, and Essie, who had jumped to the ground next to me, before continuing. You guys will take care of them while I'll handle Ember. Imi tersely showed her acknowledgement with a nod, while Cidus turned towards her, Enos, and Essie before speaking. We can easily handle this, no matter their numbers, if we all work together. Essie seemed to recall something as she asked, Brother Cidus, do you mean like the time we all fought Big Brother Ether? And, compared to back then, we all grew significantly stronger. I'll make sure to hinder their senses, and I can even join the battle while you guys use this chance to swiftly take care of them all. Clicking his tongue, Enos seemed to want to argue, yet in the end, he refrained from saying anything and instead mumbled under his breath, TSK, no honor, still no matter, it's revenge for little Essie, he muttered as if trying to convince himself. Imi didn't add anything and simply nodded in agreement, before their eyes turned towards me. Good, I have no doubt when it comes to your strength, nevertheless, do not underestimate our enemies, we still don't know their affinities, so proceed with caution. Saying that, my siblings' eyes seemed to lit up as they all simultaneously replied. Understood. Enos, you're up, I said as I turned to glance at the giant golden-scaled dragon. His mouth curled upwards into a terrifying grin as he instantly launched himself into the sky, leaving a large crevice on the ground and causing rubble to rise. Soon, a booming voice reverberated in our ears in a taunting tone. Ember, you fat scaly coward. Get over here. My eyes widened slightly in surprise, while Essie couldn't refrain from laughing. Cidus shook his head while Imi kept her poker face as Enos's taunts continued. Come out, you spineless bastard, since you like to bully others so much, come let me see from where you got the balls. You are ashamed to that name. The moment he said that, an enraged roar resounded from the depths of the gray mountain as a towering aura descended on the area. Flames instant rushed out of the cave's opening, dyeing the area red as it appeared as if it was the entrance to hell. Still, Enos was unconcerned as he smirked and continued, what are you doing? A little fire show? Haha. Damn coward, too afraid to show his face, TSK, I can't believe I wasted my time getting here only to find a spineless lizard instead of a dragon. Saying that, Enos immediately turned around and flew towards our direction, leaving the charred area behind. Just then, Ember's enraged voice thundered across the sky. Wait right there. His figure flashed out of the cave in a blur, followed by three smaller figures as they rushed after Enos, who was now out of the charred area's sphere of influence. Without giving him much time to react, I instantly launched myself into the sky like a rocket, my large figure leaving after images as I appeared before the stunned Ember and grabbed him by the throat before he could react. A large shadow seeped out of Cidus's body and enveloped the three young dragons that followed after Ember, before Enos dove right into the dark world, followed by Imi and Essie. I didn't have the leisure to pay them any more heed. My muscles budged as I dragged Ember to the ground by his neck and slammed him headfirst instantly, creating a large chasm. The red dragon was still dazed, yet he managed to attack with his tail as he tried to hit my head. At that moment, I let out all the rage that bubbled inside of me as I opened my jaw and bit down on his scaled tail. Ember cried out in pain below me, yet I didn't care as I twisted my neck and yanked his body to the side as he was sent crashing across the ground. I didn't pause my assault as a water whip instantly appeared around his neck, not letting him get too far away as I pulled him back towards me. Ember was clearly still disoriented as he attempted to reach out to the surrounding fire mana only to be met with my claw to his face, leaving a large gash on the side of his body. Ice rapidly appeared around his legs and arms, hindering his attempts to move as I jumped on top of him and began bashing his face. I didn't use mana, nor did I use my heart energy. I simply used pure raw strength to constantly hammer his head as the ground caved in below him. "You dare touch my little sister, you bastard!" I growled. "You sure did grow more arrogant since the last time I saw you," I snarled, not stopping my attacks as blood tainted Ember's face. Just then I sensed a stir in the mana behind me. Coating my claws with water magic, I swiftly turned around and cleaved right through the abnormally large fireball that suddenly appeared. Though it was for but a second, Ember managed to grab at the opportunity where I paused my assault and used his legs to push me away, forcefully breaking through the ice that surrounded him by surrounding himself in fire mana, which caused his body to appear as if it was burning. Taking a few steps back, the flames around him disappeared as his bloodied figure glared at me with a fearful gaze, a small distance between us. "Ether!" He hateful spat, and used his arm to wipe a few drops of blood that seeped into his eyes. "You fucked up, Ember, you touched my family." Chapter 123, Coordination. "That little dragoness is your family?" he asked in a doubtful tone, to which I simply snickered and replied, "Yes, and you shouldn't have touched her." Glaring at me, Ember seemed to have something else to say, yet I did not give him the time to do so before he could react. 2 whips of water mana materialized around his arms, pulling them in opposite directions and raising him to the sky. Before he could break free, an ice pillar rose from below him, aiming towards his family jewels. Ember's eyes widened as he realized my intentions. A large flame wall instantly arose beneath his feet, blocking my ice pillar. Just then a sudden barrage of water bullets descended on him from all sides as he was still preoccupied with defending. Even while under pressure, he still managed to block quite a number of my water bullets with his fire mana, causing steam to rise and turning the area surrounding us foggy. "Ether, you bastard!" he roared as a few water bullets slipped past him and struck his scales, leaving a few scratches but failing to seriously harm him. "Still, that was never my intention. Ember's pride was his weakness. My plan is to use that against him, further agitating him and effectively clouding his judgment." Although what Ember did was unforgivable for us siblings, it could still be considered normal by dragon standards, hence why killing him would be too extreme and might even cause us the wrath of an adult dragon. The main reason none of us accepted this was the fact that the victim this time was Essie. According to my understanding, dragons have a different teenager period with all their hormones acting up. It's quite strange since this does not seem to follow a normal pattern, with some dragons being active in their first few years after birth while others can even wait for tens of years, sometimes even longer, before having the urge to find a mate. Seeing how none of my siblings appeared to be interested in the matter, I assumed that their mating period has yet to arrive. Ember was different, however, which brought us to our current problem. A glint flashed through my eyes as I easily sidestepped a flame-slash-attack by Ember, which left the ground scorched. His arms bulged as he forcefully ripped my water whips away, yet before he could do anything else, I was already in front of him. Clutching my right claw, I delivered a swift attack to his abdomen, making him lower his head in pain. "We are still far from being done," I said, and was about to hit him again when I suddenly saw a terrifying amount of fire mana condensing around him. "Enough!" he roared, sending out a shockwave, followed by a large circle of flames that extended outwards from his body. The flames were surprisingly dark blue, instead of red, which caused me to frown as I hastily leapt out of the way and conjured a water shield to surround me. The moment his flames collided with my shield, however, something unexpected happened. The power of his flames was rapidly eating at my shield, causing it to evaporate while the strength of his attack did not seem to dwindle. A frown made its way into my face as I felt the scorching heatwave blasting at my face. Clicking my tongue in annoyance, I cancelled the summoning of my shield, causing the flames to madly rush towards me, yet at the exact second they were about to arrive, the blue flames simply vanished as if they never existed in the first place. TSK, I didn't want to use cosmic mana. I shook my head and cast a glance at my arm scales, which had a few burnt marks on them. Sighing, a water bubble materialized around my wounds, instantly healing them. Ember, who freed himself from being in a passive position, attempted to launch another attack before he suddenly seemed to recall something. As his flames disappeared completely, he hastily retreated and glanced about with an anxious expression. My mouth curled upwards at that scene as I softly muttered, "You can have it back." With that, the blue flames that had vanished reappeared above his head and descended without giving him any time to react. He rapidly summoned another flame shield, yet he was useless in front of his strongest attack, causing his figure to be engulfed in flames as a cry of pain escaped his mouth and reverberated across our surroundings. My siblings seemed to sense something as they paused their battle and turned to glance my way in surprise and shock. Cidus still maintained the Shadow Realm, trapping Ember's siblings within, yet his eyes were glued on me in surprise and awe. Cidus's expression was complicated. He merely glanced at the still burning figure of Ember before turning his gaze back towards his opponent, a muscular brown dragon with various spikes coming out of his back and tail. Imi, on the other hand, simply nodded at me before she as well resumed her battle. While Essie had her eyes and mouth wide open as her eyes kept darting about between me and Ember, after a few seconds she lowered her head in my direction and softly muttered, "Thank you, big brother." Saying that, she immediately turned her gaze back towards her battle and resumed supporting Cidus and Imi from time to time, all the while Cidus' figure kept blinking across the dark realm, occasionally delivering critical attacks to their opponents. Their coordination is ridiculously good. Even Cidus is being helpful instead of simply rushing ahead. He's even using his golems to confuse the enemies, I inwardly noted. I had to admit, with all of us siblings together, we were truly a force to be reckoned with. Each one seemed to complement the other, covering for their weaknesses while augmenting their strengths. Essie was weak physically, but she was almost invincible in the sky, hence why she took the high ground and provided support, using her wind to boost Cidus' speed while occasionally sending wind blades to help. Cidus was the tank, with the help of his stone golems. It was not an overstatement to say that he was a one-dragon army. Cidus was the assassin. In his dark realm, he held the absolute advantage as he kept flickering across the battlefield. Imi was the fastest out of all of us. It was hard to tell since she liked to laze around most of the time, but once she took action, it was crystal clear. She merely appeared as a flash of light, not giving her opponent the time to figure out what happened as the dark realm abruptly brightens before she sends out her attack. I shook my head with a sigh. It was only a matter of time before they finished off their fight. The only reason they were taking this long in the first place was the fact that they were using their opponents as means to further hone their skills. This made me feel strangely proud as I nodded my head in approval. It was then that I felt a stir behind me as the flames that burned Ember finally disappeared, leaving his burnt figure standing there with difficulty. Guess even fire dragons can get burnt. Chapter 124, Conclusion. Just as I glanced over at Ember's charred body, I momentarily paused in surprise. The little dragon's eyes held a clear hint of madness in them as he seemed to be desperate to give up everything just for the sake of landing a true blow on me. This first made me feel disappointed as I thought that after the trial, he would slowly learn to control his emotions a bit more. It's okay to be arrogant as long as you can keep a rational mind during battle, and be sure that you won't fall into your opponent's traps. Ember sadly did not seem to have learned that lesson as he glared daggers at me. Besides disappointment, I was also wary of his retaliation. Every cornered animal would fight back, not to mention a whole dragon, hence why I had to be careful. My first thought was that he would use his dragon breath. If so, then the situation was still manageable. I could divert the direction of his attack and send it elsewhere. It would probably be for the best to send it upwards towards the sky and not use it to attack him, as I was sure that would only serve to further anger and perhaps mortally wound him. But then again, I need to swiftly end this. Should I try to knock him out? He is in a weakened state after all, so there's a high chance of success despite his defenses, I inwardly mumbled as I began to plan my attack. It never hurt to be careful at times like these. Just as I was about to proceed, my eyes dilated as I felt a familiar ripple of power extend towards me. "You crazy idiot!" I instinctively cried out. Ember didn't use dragon breath as I expected him to do. No, he was far more desperate and suicidal than I anticipated as he reached out to attack me with his soul space. One had to know that a dragon's soul space is his biggest advantage, but also his greatest weakness. Under no circumstances should one use it if they felt that the situation held too many unknown factors. The risk of you failing your attack and suffering an immense backlash was immense. And if your soul space attack failed, then you would almost certainly die. There was of course a small possibility of surviving, but that was for old dragons who held immense experiences, not young adults like us. And although I was confident in my soul space, I still did not want to pit myself against a crazy bastard like Ember. If you want to die, then don't drag me into this, you suicidal idiot. I yelled out, too. Which he gave a crazy mad laugh as if he had already given up on everything just to take me down. As soon as I felt his soul space extend towards me in an attempt to drag me in, mine automatically responded as it instinctively lashed out to block his attack. Without much time to think, I hastily called out to the cosmic mana, causing it to descend on his burnt figure, effectively surrounding him in a matter of seconds before his body disappeared. That was when I finally managed to heave a sigh of relief as his soul space power disappeared with him while I reined mine back. Damn, I never thought he'd go that crazy, I mumbled before raising my head towards the sky and squinting my eyes. I calmly took 4 large steps backward and patiently waited. Soon a whistling sound echoed throughout the surroundings as a large figure plummeted from the sky. With a loud boom, a vast chasm opened in the ground before me, within it was Ember's unconscious body. Behind his back, his wings were missing, a sigh escaped my mouth as I saw that. I didn't want to do that, but that was the only way I could think of to resolve the sudden situation. Using cosmic mana to teleport him away and send his wings elsewhere as well. Normally, this would be an extremely hard thing to do, otherwise, I could simply separate my enemies' heads from their bodies using cosmic mana and instantly end the battle. But every dragon has a layer of mana surrounding them at all times, and unless I was way above them in strength, such an attack would be sensed and stopped using their mana to interfere with mine. Ember's case was a bit different since he was already exhausted and hurt. His protective mana was mostly depleted, leaving him vulnerable. A momentary weakness I managed to exploit, and without his wings, he came crashing down like a small meteor. He wouldn't die since I didn't send him too far in the sky, but his head will definitely be hurting when he wakes up. Add to that the sudden loss of his wings, I sighed while shaking my head as I glanced at his collapsed figure. It might have been rather extreme of me to push things this far. I certainly did not intend to do so, but I still failed to realize that even a cornered rat would fight back. I neglected the fact that for Ember his pride might very well be more important than his life. How foolish, I whispered with a sigh. Still, even with how things developed, I didn't regret my course of action. It was an experience I learned from. Glancing at Ember's unconscious figure, a tiny voice whispered at the back of my head to simply finish him off. I once again shook my head and refrained from acting impulsively. Killing him would without a doubt end the problem of him seeking revenge, though it would create an even larger one with the adult dragons backing him. Besides, if it's a fight he is looking for, I'd always be happy to accommodate him. And judging by Ember's arrogance, I doubted he would do anything beneath him, such as attacking Essie or my siblings as a petty means of revenge against me. Fee, let him come if he wants, I'll be waiting. With that, I silently stepped away from the chasm and made my way towards my siblings, who just about wrapped up their fight. Their side of the battlefield was completely ruined as well, with countless deep fissures all across the ground. The area was completely flattened, and right in the middle of it was the figure of 3 young dragons collapsed to the ground. They were still conscious as they glanced fearfully at my siblings. Seeing that, I nodded in approval before using cosmic mana to open a door through the void and took 1 step forward, instantly bringing me next to Cidus, who glanced at me in shock and surprise as I appeared out of nowhere. Chapter 125. Cidus's Request. Brother. What was that? Asked Enos as he stared at me with shining eyes. Cosmic mana, I answered with a smile, to which Imi nodded in understanding. Big brother, your scales color is a little bit different too, noted Essie as she glanced at the faint green vine pattern on my sides. To that, I nodded before replying, that change occurred after I gained initial control over earth mana. Hearing that, Enos was the most surprised one as his eyes lit up in understanding before he spoke. No wonder I sensed the familiar mana surrounding you. But I didn't pay too much heed to it. Brother, you gained control over earth mana as well. Cidus, who was silent all this while, couldn't help but blurt out, while Imi, who was by his side, looked at me in wonder. I glanced at the collapsed figure of the 3 young dragons and the unconscious, wingless Ember, before speaking. Let's talk on the way, we are done here. Saying that, I instantly launched myself to the sky, leaving a small crater on the ground. Essie was right behind, followed by Imi, Cidus, and finally, Enos, who couldn't help but glance back at his defeated opponents, a satisfied expression on his face. So, when did you gain affinity with earth mana? He asked as he flew closer to me. Cidus and Imi couldn't help but draw closer as well, curious to hear my reply, while Essie on the other hand settled on her usual spot on top of my head, waiting for me to speak. Well, it all started when I met our grandmother. By the time we landed back outside of our cave, all of my siblings had different expressions on their faces after hearing my story. Cidus was most excited when he learned that some of the gods were huge giants. He constantly expressed his desire in fighting some of them. Essie's eyes were wide open when I talked about the delicacies grandmother had me eat and the colorful plains. Cidus, on the other hand, was interested in the fruit of the tree goddess, as he took the initiative to ask me if he could gain earth mana affinity with it as well. Since I wasn't sure about that myself, I refrained from confirming nor denying, and simply said that it would be best if he checks himself. When it came to Emmy, she was the most composed one out of all of them, as she simply listened to everything with a curious expression. Most of her interest was drawn to grandmother and her strange shape-shifting magic. Once inside the cave, I habitually glanced around only to find it empty. Father and mother were still nowhere to be seen. Cidus yawned and slowly made his way towards the small pyramid of fairy skulls on his corner. He seemed to admire his handiwork for a few seconds before he nodded in satisfaction and laid down to rest. Emmy didn't enter and instead curled up around the entrance where she basked under the sun. I glanced at Essie, who still seemed to be a bit hesitant to take to the sky after what happened. After a few seconds of hesitation, she sheepishly ran out to lay down next to Emmy, who didn't mind. Cidus' eyes, on the other hand, kept darting around as he kept sneaking peeks at me, as if he was hesitant to say what's on his mind. "What's wrong?" I asked. Hearing my question, he paused for a few seconds before seemingly making up his mind as he replied, "I need your help." Hearing that, I raised my non-existent brows in surprise as I motioned for him to continue. His eyes glanced at Cidus, who already closed his eyes and was fast asleep, and then back towards the entrance where Emmy and Essie were laying down, before he slowly walked towards the deeper ends of the cave, ushering me to follow. My eyes were unconsciously drawn to a few drawings on the cave wall. They depicted a black dragon fighting strangely familiar obsidian monsters. The first thought that crossed my mind was that the dragon looked strangely similar to Cidus before I realized that the drawings took over the entirety of the wall on my right, with various parts of it scratched off. While some of the monsters had an X mark around them, others still had a circle. This I subconsciously muttered before glancing at Cidus, who nodded at me. Not too far east from our cave, past the Grey Mountain Range, I came across a particular large chasm in the ground, he said. I nodded carefully, waiting for him to continue. Something there was calling for me. Still, I didn't dare rashly enter, and so I came back. After a few days, I still found myself drawn back to that chasm. I even had a dream of an ancient black dragon calling me. He took a deep breath before continuing. After some preparations, I decided to go visit during the night when my magic is at its peak. There I encountered a few of those tainted monsters. Most of them lacked any distinctive features. Some were humanoid in shape while others appeared to belong to formal animals. I can't be too sure. He shook his head. "You mean the drawings here?" I said, motioning towards the walls with my head. Nodding, Cidus continued, "Yes, I tried to record what I encountered, the dangerous places, the strong monsters, the ones I have already taken care of, and the ones still left." Saying that, he slowly walked towards the wall and tapped at the middle part with his tail where a strange monster was drawn. "This is the strongest tainted monster I encountered, and even with my strength, I couldn't do much against him and could only retreat," he said with a solemn tone. I didn't say anything and instead walked over to study the drawing of the monster. It had 4 huge shadowy wings that, his legs appeared to be that of a goat, but I couldn't be too sure since the drawing was not too perfect. The monster's head was hazy as if it was a simple blob of darkness. It didn't seem to be connected to its torso and instead was floating right above it. The strange part was that it had no hands nor arms. Turning my attention back to Cidus, I asked in curiosity, "And why didn't you mention this to the others?" Shaking his head, Cidus replied in a serious tone, "It's too dangerous for them, especially with their mana affinities." Chapter 126, Head Out. I glanced at the monster's drawing in the wall and then back at Cidus, before remaining silent for a while. Something seems to be calling for him from that particular chasm. I inwardly mumbled as I turned my attention back to the various obsidian monsters on the wall. First of all, the main problem lies with the fact that we have no idea what motives this unknown entity has for calling out to you, I said with a deep frown, to which Cidus nodded solemnly in agreement. It's also difficult to accurately measure its level of strength, making the entire plan one fraught with danger, I added, while Cidus remained silent, waiting for me to finish. If I'm being honest, there are too many unknown factors in this entire situation, all of which makes me hesitate to go through with the exploration of this chasm. You might have gotten lucky so far and not encountered anything truly dangerous besides minus. I slowly raised my palm and tapped at the picture of the boss monster before continuing. Even when faced with it, you still managed to escape without any serious injuries, thus I'm not too concerned about this monster, but rather with what comes after it. Do you understand? I asked with a serious expression. Cidus had an expression as if he was saying that he already expected such an answer from me before nodding. I understand, brother, and I'm well aware of the dangers I might encounter along the way, he said. Still, you are willing to go through with it? I asked. Yes. He replied without any hesitation. His eyes seemed to shine brightly with resolution as he stared straight at me, showcasing his determination when it came to this matter. Seeing that there was no changing his mind, I let out a small sigh and shook my head before asking, is there any reason why you are willing to go so far? Hearing my question, Cidus fell silent for a few moments as if deliberating on how to reply, before he ultimately spoke. I have a feeling that if I go there, I might find what I'm looking for. A frown made its way to my face as I asked, what you are looking for? And what is that? Cidus's eyes seemed to burn with a flame of desire as he stared at me with a resolution before he replied, a way to get stronger. A way to get stronger. I subconsciously repeated as I brought my gaze to study Cidus. Ever since we were born, he was always chasing after power as if he had something to prove. After his first loss against me, I honestly did not think he would take it well, nor did I expect things to work out between us. Still, reality is often different from what we perceive. Although it had clearly left a mark on him, Cidus still did not allow his will to be broken. He continued working hard in his own way, constantly striving to catch up and not fall behind me. I did not pay much attention to it in the past, but this matter is clearly very important to him. It does not matter if I go or not, he would still attempt to challenge that chasm alone. This was his determination, his pride. He must have felt a sense of pressure after I came back from the land of the gods and obtained the affinity with earth mana. Another sigh escaped my mouth as I glanced at my troublesome little brother who was calmly looking back at me while waiting for my response. Seeing that, I steeled my resolve and spoke, all right, since it doesn't seem like there is any way to change your mind, I'll respect your decision and will follow you to this chasm, but, I deliberately paused for a few seconds as Cidus's eyes seemed to lit up. He then straightened his back and waited for me to continue. If I deem the situation to be too dangerous for us to handle at any time during our exploration, then you must not be stubborn and listen to me if I order you to retreat, is that clear? I asked in a serious tone. Hearing that, Cidus's expression softened a bit before he nodded and replied, I understand, I will follow brother's command. Good, well then since we don't have much to do anyway, and since I'm still okay after the previous fight, we can head there now, that is of course if you are also up to it, otherwise we can wait until you recuperate to your optimal state. Shaking his head, Cidus calmly replied, I'm also good to go. I did not expend too much energy when dealing with the Ember siblings, especially with Yunos holding them back while Imi and Essie provided support. I have already recovered and am ready to head out. Nodding, I motioned towards the exit of the cave with my head, ushering him to lead the way. Cidus didn't say anything as he calmly made his way out while I followed behind him. My eyes casually glanced at Yunos, who was fast asleep next to his small mountain of fairy skulls. This was a rather unusual sight since it was still bright outside. The battle from earlier must have tired him out, I mentally noted. Although Yunos was freakishly strong, it was still not an easy feat to hold off 3 young dragons. Although Imi, Cidus, and Essie provided support, Yunos took all the attacks of their opponents head-on, shielding the company from harm. Once outside, Imi didn't open her eyes as she remained motionless on the ground, the sun reflecting off her scales, making them shine brighter as they appeared to look like precious gems. Essie, who was laying by her side, on the other hand, peeked at us in curiosity before asking, Big brother Ether, brother Cidus, you are heading out? Cidus turned his attention back towards her and replied with a rare gentle tone, Yes, there are some matters I need to care off. Brother Ether agreed to help me, he said without further elaborating. Essie seemed to sense that there was a deeper part to the matter. Still, she did not pursue it any longer and gently nodded at him before speaking, Good luck. She then turned her gaze towards me and continued, Take care, big brother. To that a smile subconsciously made its way to my face as I nodded in acknowledgement. Cidus then instantly launched himself to the sky, turning into a streak of black light. I swiftly followed behind. We continued our journey in silence. Neither of us spoke, yet the mood was not awkward, quite the opposite. It was a good type of silence, one that I didn't mind. Ever since I gained my initial control over cosmic mana, one of the most useful abilities I have gained was the power to open a tear into the void and teleport where I want to. Although it sounds great, it was not without flaws. Firstly, I still lacked experience in this matter, hence why my teleportation range was still rather limited. Another flaw was that for the moment I could not take anyone with me. I sighed in regret at that thought. If my control was better, then the journey would go much smoother and be much safer than it was at the moment. I subconsciously raised my head to glance at the multicolored mana stream flowing in the sky above. Teleportation was rather interesting. I would use cosmic mana to establish a link with the stream, then using that link, I would then create another one at my destination, which would, in turn, allow me to teleport my body into my targeted area. Using the link to the stream, I would open a tear in the void and follow it, so in that case, I would not get lost somewhere in the void before emerging at my destination. There were a lot of experiments I wanted to try, and just as I was thinking about all of that, Cidus' voice resounded in my ear. "We are here." Chapter 127, The Door. Right before my eyes, the forest trees grew sparse as a large area cleared out in the middle, revealing a deep dark chasm that appeared as if it was sucking the light surrounding it. The pit was completely dark, giving off an eerie feeling. It unconsciously made my scales tingle the more I looked at it. I turned my head to glance at Cidus, who had a strangely excited expression on his face as we faced the deep hole. His affinity is darkness, so I suppose that explains why he would be comfortable in places like these. Still, for me it's just creepy. I inwardly lampooned as we both landed at the edge of the rift. The area surrounding it was frighteningly quiet, even the mana seemed to be in a restless state. The strangeness of the situation just further served to make me keep my guard up at all times as I studied our surroundings first. Using my spirit vision first, I was able to confirm that most of the elements appeared as if they were purposely steering clear of the area around the crevice, almost as if they were avoiding something. The only element that prevailed was the dark, almost sinister one. This further served to make me feel more uncomfortable. Just as I was about to say something, I was suddenly faced with Cidus's expectant gaze as he waited for my instruction. Fuck. I inwardly grumbled as I started to regret agreeing to this. Still, I tried to remain calm as my face did not betray my inner thoughts. "Let's go, but remember, if I say we retreat, then we retreat." Seeing the deep crevice in person gave me a bad feeling, and I couldn't help but remind him again, to which Cidus didn't seem to mind too much as he nodded solemnly to indicate his understanding. Slowly we made our way towards the edge of the chasm. I gradually pulled closer and glanced downwards as a rush of cold air brushed against my scales, causing a tingle in my spine. What faced me was absolute darkness, preventing me from peering deep inside. I took a deep breath to calm my nerves and activated my spirit vision. The scenery changed accordingly as countless black shadows swam in the darkness. Such a chilling spectacle would have been alarming had I not been sure that the shadows were nothing but the manifestation of the dark mana. I curiously glanced at Cidus. His body seemed to almost merge with the darkness as a small contented smile hung on his face. The surrounding mana seemed to be attracted towards him as well. Bringing my attention back to the deep pit, I steeled my resolve and swiftly jumped downwards. Cidus did not say a word and silently followed behind. My heart thumped loudly in my chest as the feeling of weightlessness accompanied by the eerie atmosphere of the chasm caused me to be nervous. Thankfully, the fall was not too deep, as after a couple of seconds, I flapped my wings to slow my descent as the ground came to view. With my vision, which had long since adjusted to the darkness, I carefully studied our surroundings. Although Cidus had already taken care of the monsters in the area, one could never be too careful. His figure silently appeared by my side as if he had just materialized out of the thin air. And he holds an absolute advantage in places like these with his mana affinity. I inwardly nodded in thought before speaking. "Lead the way," I said. Since he was the most familiar with the layout of this place, coupled with the fact that I was feeling quite uncomfortable, I instinctively wished to end the mission as fast as possible to go back. The atmosphere in the chams just rubbed me off. Usually, I should not have any problems with dark places, especially when considering that our cave was not so bright in certain areas. Still, the place here was different. Just as I was thinking about that, another breeze of cold air brushed against my scales as my eyes kept darting around, ready for anything. Under Cidus's guide, we continued delving deeper inside the dark abyss. The heavy feeling in my chest just kept growing with each step, yet in contrast, Cidus appeared like a fish in the water. He seemed to be the most at ease in this place. The cave walls were surprisingly large, easily so for me to walk around comfortably without having to bend my head downwards. This just made me more curious about the circumstances behind such a large underground cave. Yet I did not drop my guard, quite the opposite. I was more nervous than ever, yet tried my best not to show it. Cidus brought me here for support, but when it actually comes to it, who would support who? I inwardly lampooned, trying to ease my nerves as we steadily approached the area where the monster was situated at. Surprisingly, or unsurprisingly, we did not encounter any monster or any sort of resistance along the way. It did not take long before the cave passage seemed to extend from all sides as an abnormally large door appeared before our eyes. The door was an ancient brown-colored one. It appeared to belong to an era long forgotten, with all sorts of strange runes carved into it. Strange letters were etched at the very bottom and very top of the door. Once I tried to focus on them, my mind turned heavy as if I encountered something incomprehensible. I soon found myself getting dizzy as I was forced to look away from the strange letters. I subconsciously turned to look at Cidus only to pause as my breathing hastened. His expression was one full of fear, his eyes seemed to be glued to the letters I was looking at. It was almost as if he was in a trance. Instantly, I figured that something was wrong as I hastily used my hands to yank his head away, forcing him to face me instead. Cidus's eyes were dazed for a second before they seemed to regain their clarity. His body visibly started to shudder as his voice came out as nothing but a whisper. "This door was not here last time." Hearing that, a shiver ran down my spine as I forced myself from turning around to face the ancient door once more. I took a deep breath and whispered back, the uneasy feeling in my heart growing by the second. "Are you sure we didn't go the wrong way?" I asked, though inwardly I was already aware of the answer. Ever since we stepped inside the underground cave, we had only been following one path without any turns. Cidus hastily shook his head and was about to say something when a loud screaming noise stopped him, making his body freeze as I subconsciously held my breath. The door was opening. Chapter 128, It. The sound of the ancient door opening was extremely jarring. With it came an indescribable pressure alongside a feeling of irrational fear. For some reason, I didn't dare turn my head to face the door as I kept my eyes glued on Cidus. He was the same, as I could see his pupils shaking nervously. The sound continued for a few seconds before it abruptly stopped, yet neither of us made any move, nor did we dare turn our heads to glance at the door. The feeling of terror gripped my heart as an almost silent whisper seemed to call for me, tempting me to sneak a peek. My body was almost helpless under the enticement of the unfamiliar voice. It had a strange allure to it. The language it called to me with was not one I was familiar with. It was quite bizarre, to say the least, yet strangely I was able to understand it, almost as if it was speaking directly in my mind. My body began to subconsciously turn when my rational mind seemed to protest. "No, I can't. If I look, then I'll die." I did not know from where such thoughts surfaced, yet for a second I was faced with an internal struggle, with my dragonic instincts wanting me to take a look, while my more rational side refused to budge. I subconsciously glanced at Cidus, only to see a terror-stricken expression on his face. He was slowly turning his head towards the door with a helpless face. The moment our eyes met, a pleading expression flashed past his eyes as if he was asking me for help. Seeing that, my rational side finally won the battle as I hastily moved to block his point of view, settling myself between him and the ancient door. With my now larger frame, I was able to easily cover his vision as the door was no longer visible. Cidus's face relaxed as his shoulders dropped. He then quickly closed his eyes shut and refused to open them, or even budge. I was about to say something when I felt an extremely cold breeze brush against the back of my neck, almost as if someone or something was breathing on my back. The feeling of terror resurfaced as the ice-cold feeling made my scales shudder. From the corner of my eyes I was able to spot what looked like a dark shadow looming over me from all sides. Without hesitation, I decisively closed my eyes. It was too late to do anything, and I had a feeling that if we were to run, things would not end up the way we want them to. "Calm down, Ether. If this thing had the power to directly harm us, it would have done so the second it left the door. For now, it did not, so it's probably weak. Perhaps the only way it could affect us is if we look at it directly." I inwardly mumbled, trying to distract myself from the feeling of someone pressing their face by the side of my own. "Cidus, whatever you do, do not open your eyes," I quickly reminded him, to which he replied in an anxious tone. "I know, brother, but it's hard. It's almost as if my body is trying to move against my will," he whispered. "Shit, what to do? Cidus will probably not be able to hold on for much longer." My mind began to race as I tried to think out of a solution when suddenly, a flash of inspiration passed by my mind. I silently reached out to my newly acquired earth mana. Although extremely faint due to the presence of the ominous dark mana, it was still nonetheless present since we were underground, and although extremely faint, it was still enough for what I had in mind. With the help of the mana, an earth mask of sorts appeared on my and Cidus's faces, covering our eyes and preventing us from seeing anything we shouldn't. "Cidus?" I asked nervously. "This is your mana, brother?" he asked cautiously, to which I replied with a sigh of relief, seeing that he was still okay. Yes, for now, don't move. I was not able to finish my sentence before an ear-piercing scream penetrated the air, causing my eardrums to ache and my knees to shake. The scream was exceedingly high-pitched, and it seemed to carry with it the ability to affect us physically as I could not control my shaking. The thing, whatever it was angry, probably since I stopped it from tempting Cidus. I could sense it standing mere inches away from my face, which made shivers run down my spine. I was not sure what I was facing, which just made it all the more terrifying, yet I tried my best not to move despite my wobbly legs. The cave began to tremble as an ancient force seemed to stir in our surroundings. This one was not sinister, and instead, it carried with it a hint of warmth and familiarity. Once this new presence appeared, the shadow that loomed over my head and was breathing in front of my face seemed to get pulled back. I could sense it struggle through the fluctuations of the mana in the air. It trashed about, trying to escape the mighty force that dragged it away. Soon, the sound of the door closing echoed through the cave. Alongside it was a reluctant high-pitched scream that disappeared into the distance. Bang! Silence once again reigned, yet neither did I nor Cidus dare move. We remained rooted in place for what seemed like ages before I finally felt like the place was safe again. I slowly reached out to pull off the earth mask and hesitantly opened my eyes only to pause in surprise and shock moments later. Cidus, you can take off your mask. I whispered, to which he did. Brother. Where is the door? He asked in confusion as his eyes darted about. Faced with that question, I remained silent. We seemed to be in the same place, yet for some reason, that ancient door with strange symbols was nowhere to be found. The cave extended deeper before our eyes, akin to the open jaws of a monster, yet the door was not there. Just what the hell happened? I inwardly muttered. I don't know, I said in reply to Cidus' question. His body visibly shuddered as he recalled the memory of what just happened before he asked, do we continue, or do we go back? Hearing that, I almost unconsciously blurted out to go back before I held myself from doing so. On one hand, that thing was extremely dangerous, it made me feel like I was helpless before it without even looking at it, yet on the other hand, it seems to be held back by some sort of familiar force. A dragon maybe? I wondered before replying in a serious tone. Let's continue for a little bit longer. If things get any more dangerous then we head back. Chapter 129, Neelath. With the disappearance of the ancient door, silence once again reigned in the large cave corridor. The air turned stale as I glanced about for any hidden threats. Seeing none, I shot Cidus a glimpse and nodded, after which we cautiously continued forward. The silence was almost deafening, with the only sound being that of our footsteps. This created an eerie atmosphere, keeping both of us on guard as we constantly scanned our surroundings for any hint of danger, yet surprisingly there was none. The cave seemed to extend deep into the abyss with no end in sight. Cidus appeared a bit unnerved as he whispered, "This is different from my last time here, brother. It's almost as if we have teleported to an entirely different area." Hearing that, I solemnly nodded to indicate my understanding. Although we didn't encounter any monsters, an invisible heavy force seemed to be pressing on our chests at all times, making it impossible for us to relax. Just as I was about to speak, a feeling akin to that of passing through water washed over me, making me feel as if I was truly transported into another plane. I hastily turned to look at Cidus. A sigh of relief escaped my mouth as I saw that we were not separated. "Be careful, we seem to have passed through another place just now," I said, my eyes squinting as I looked left and right. Cidus appeared to be a little bit confused, dazed almost, as he nodded subconsciously. Seeing that, a frown made its way to my face as I hesitantly called out, "Cidus." His head turned to face me in an almost mechanical way, his eyes were confused with a dazed expression. He looked like someone who had just woken up and was not yet completely conscious. What the minus? An extreme feeling of danger brushed over me as I felt my scales rise unconsciously. Just then, a deep ancient voice reverberated in the dark cave from all sides. It sounded tired, yet also curious as it spoke. "Your little friend isn't able to maintain his consciousness in here. I'm more interested in how you can do so." "Who?" I subconsciously yelled out as I moved closer to protect Cidus in case of a sudden attack. The voice that seemed to come from everywhere all at once chuckled and replied, "Who? Haha, such an interesting youngling," it said. Just as I was about to reach out for the mana in our surroundings, my eyes widened in shock as the cave suddenly disappeared as if it had never existed in the first place. We were now standing in an incredibly large dark space with countless small white dots littered across the ground and sky. It was almost as if I was standing in space staring at the faraway stars. For a moment I was stunned and unable to speak as my eyes darted left and right. Cidus was still by my side, yet his dazed look remained the same. A soul space? I subconsciously muttered. That was the only explanation I could come up with. Did we enter when we passed through that place? I inwardly noted as I recalled the feeling of walking through water. Impressive, the voice replied with a hint of surprise. This confirmed my guess as my heart calmed down by a bit. Although I wasn't sure of the intentions of the dragon who owned this soul space, I still felt more comfortable facing him than one of the shades. Just as I was thinking about that, a figure suddenly morphed into being a few meters ahead of me. It was a black dragon with a few strips of silver on his head. The dragon had one broken horn, while his other one held complicated runes. His large wings were folded as he stared at me with a curious glint. His eyes were of a similar color to his scales, obsidian. The longer I stared at them, the more I felt like I was staring at a bottomless abyss. For a brief second, I was able to sense the emotions hidden behind that gaze. Tiredness, loneliness, anger, madness. It was very brief, yet for that second I felt connected to the ancient dragon. A hint of surprise flashed by his eyes as he studied me with a newfound interest. A young cosmic dragon, that's rare, he said before turning his gaze towards Cidus and another pillar of creation. He then turned his attention to me and asked, "Your brother?" I slowly nodded and subconsciously stepped back to cover Cidus. The dragon seemed to have anticipated my answer as he nodded. "So what are you doing here, young one?" Hearing his question, I hesitated for a second before ultimately deciding to be honest. Something here was calling out to my little brother. We came to find out what it was. The ancient dragon nodded once more, his body turned blurry for a second before it recovered. "That would probably be my core that attracted him here since we are both keepers of the dark pillar," he explained. Hearing the word core, my mind instantly went back to Amanita's crystal back in the ancient battlefield. I still have to go back there, I inwardly noted before nodding at the ancient dragon. I had an inkling and now my suspicions were confirmed. The dragon before me was dead. His predicament was probably the same as Amanita. "Does this mean you can help my little brother?" I shamelessly asked. The old dragon seemed surprised at my request before he burst out into laughter, causing the entire dark place to shake as if it was about to collapse. "Ha ha ha. Interesting, sure I can help your little brother, but as he is right now, he is still unable to take on my inheritance. It's best to wait until he is stronger before he comes back. Whether he finds me or not will depend solely on his luck," grinned the dragon. "Depends on his luck? He can't come back to this place?" I asked. Never in one place, young one. It's your fortune that you stumbled across me, and misfortune that stumbled across that thing," he said, to which I frowned, my mind going back to the scene of the ancient door and oppressive feeling that came with it, alongside the ancient aura that seemed to hold whatever monster back. Countless thoughts and speculations flashed across my mind. Does that mean the old dragon is holding back whatever monster is behind that door? Before I could ask, the dark space suddenly began to crack. The ancient dragon had a serious expression on his face before a tired sigh escaped his mouth. "It's time for you to go, young one." "Wait. What's your name?" Seeing that the space was about to collapse, I hurriedly asked the first thing that came to mind. The black dragon chuckled at that and replied, "Neelath," saying that the soul space shattered before we once again found ourselves back in the dimly lit cave. Chapter 130, Plea for Help. After a few seconds, Cidus's eyes finally regained their clarity. He looked at me with a confused expression, all the while constantly scanning his surroundings as if looking for something. "What do you remember?" I asked. "I am not sure. It feels like I just woke up from a dream, one where we met an old black dragon. We talked and he said something to me, but I can't remember," he replied with a shake of his head. The confusion was clear in his eyes as he kept trying to recall what he missed. I slowly nodded at that and replied honestly without hiding anything. "We did meet an ancient black dragon. He called himself Neelath. We were dragged into his soul space, that's why you don't remember much. I suspect it was also him that saved us from the monster behind that door," I explained seriously. Cidus's eyes widened in shock and surprise at my revelation. It took him a few seconds to calm himself before I continued. "There's a possibility for you to obtain Neelath's inheritance. This will undoubtedly help you grow stronger," though the old dragon was too vague about it. I clicked my tongue in annoyance. It seemed like all dragons liked to speak in a vague, mysterious tone instead of just saying things clearly. "Inheritance." Cidus's eyes shone at the mention of a way for him to grow stronger. "Yes, though as I said, you'll have to find him again next time, and by then you need to be stronger if you want to withstand the inheritance," I slowly explained. Cidus nodded in understanding, his gaze quickly turning determined. He didn't question where he should look for the old dragon. nor did he inquire for any more ways to grow stronger. With a goal set, Cidus's entire body seemed to brim with energy and excitement, one that I haven't felt from him in a long time. "Should we continue exploring the cave?" he asked as his eyes wandered down the dark corridor with a newfound determination. I followed his gaze and slowly nodded. Besides the ancient door monster and the old dragon, we still haven't come across the monster we initially came here to deal with. With the door gone, I doubted it would reappear here again. The appearance of Neelath was probably closely linked to it. Maybe his task is to constantly chase after the ancient door to seal the monster behind it? I inwardly wondered. It was just a rough guess, but at the moment it seemed like the most plausible one. "Let's go," I said and carefully continued ahead, Cidus closely following behind me. It took us a while before we finally reached an exit. For some reason, however, something told me that the world inside the cave and outside were different, not quite like when we entered Neelath's soul space. Perhaps because my affinity towards mana was higher compared to others, Cidus didn't seem to notice anything wrong, yet I was quite sensitive to the change. I tipped my head back and glanced upwards. There was no moon or stars in the sky. The night was akin to a cloth blanketing us. "It's already dark," I mumbled with a frown. Cidus's eyes suddenly turned serious as he moved closer to me and spoke softly, "We are here, brother." Hearing that, I curiously scanned our surroundings. We were standing in the middle of what looked like a dark valley. The sky was dark, and our surroundings were darker. A layer of dark mana seemed to cloak the area ahead, preventing me from peering at what lay behind. "That should be where the monster is at, right?" As if on cue, the surroundings in that area suddenly began to morph as the dark mana moved to form a large imposing figure. Its 4 huge shadowy wings looked larger in person, his 2 goat legs gave off a creepy feeling, yet the most eye-catching feature of the monster was its hazy head. It was just a blob of darkness that constantly moved, all the while it wasn't connected to its torso and just silently floated right above it. With its sudden appearance, the dark mana in the area seemed to grow relentless, as if hurriedly rushed to surround the monster. A frown made its way to my face as I glanced at the scene. The monster appeared to be swallowing the mana, constantly encompassing it inside its body. An ear-piercing roar rumbled across the dark valley, causing my frown to deepen. Cidus' expression turned serious as he faced the monster. He looked like he was facing his archenemy. "Interesting," Cidus said. "Something was calling him into this place. At first I thought that the thing was Neelath's inheritance. Even the ancient dragon seemed to silently approve, but now, maybe that's not completely true." I noted. The more I looked at the monster constantly swallowing the dark mana, the more I seemed to understand something. The inheritance is one part, but I think the real reason for his summoning is the mana itself. The mana is calling him for help. Perhaps before I wouldn't have considered such a possibility, but after I visited Grandmother and the land of the gods, and after I saw the stream of mana, my viewpoint of things slowly began to change. The mana is conscious. It seems to consist of countless elements, constantly swimming through the stream and filling the land. Whatever this monster is doing is clearly harmful to the dark mana, and since Cidus is the one with the affinity to this particular element, he is the one that can hear its plea for help. The more I thought about it, the more I grew confident in my chain of thought. That must be it. Cidus looked like he was barely stopping himself from lunging forward, while I on the other hand started considering my options. Water mana is sparse in here, so using it will not be very helpful. Earth mana, on the other hand, is abundant, but I'm not sure of its effect against dark mana. Then that just leaves cosmic mana, I whispered, a wide grin slowly making its way to my face. "Cidus," I called out. He seemed to be having a hard time tearing his attention away from the monster that was still sucking in the dark mana from its surroundings. "Brother. It looks like the monster is dependent on dark mana. I'm not sure what the effect will be if we separate it from it, but I have a feeling it won't be pretty. Your affinity towards the mana should be higher since it seems to be brute forcing it. It'll give you a chance and you use that to wrestle back control over the mana," I quickly explained. Cidus appeared to have understood my plan as he nodded seriously, a dangerous aura emitting from his body as he readied himself. "Good." Seeing that, I nodded in approval and turned my attention back to the monster. "Shall we start then?" Chapter 131, Teamwork. Turning my attention back to the monster, it still appeared to have no intention of attacking us as it continued to gather dark mana to surround its body. I slowly stepped forward, 1 step, 2 steps, 3 before the monster finally seemed to sense something as he paused. The floating orb of darkness looked like it was staring right into my soul as an ear-piercing shriek escaped its body. The sound was irritating, to say the least, and it made me frown with displeasure. I had already established that my water mana would not be very helpful here. Earth might be abundant, but it still fell short when compared to one of the pillars of existence, hence why the only choice to counter it was by using another pillar. I silently reached out to the cosmic mana. Although I was hundreds of feet below ground, the incomplete statue in my soul space still shook as a thin thread of cosmic mana extended outwards and excited my body, slowly reaching out towards the cosmos above. It was not long before I felt the cosmic mana descent. Its elements were strange when I studied them with my spiritual vision. They looked like celestial bodies, miniature planets of sorts that rushed into my command. The dark mana's elements, on the other hand, held varied shadowy forms, some tall, others short, some humanoids, others monster-like. The only common point between them was that they were all shadows with no distinctive features. Seeing and feeling the cosmic mana surrounding me, I closed my eyes to bask under the sensation for a second. My body was extremely comfortable, even my scales started to tingle alongside the mana. I can try to separate its body parts first, see if that will weaken him. With but a thought, cosmic mana surged towards the monster. The mana was surprisingly tame this time around and did not even attempt to defy my orders or follow them half-heartedly. It lunged forward, aiming at the monster's left leg, though as if sensing something, the abomination stepped back, dark mana condensing in the area where he was standing. He forcefully willed its elements to change form into a large shadow that opened its abyssal mouth to swallow my attack. The moment the surge of cosmic mana clashed against the dark one, both sides seemed to cancel each other as the monster's shadow disappeared, teleported into another plane. My cosmic mana was thus nullified as well. Still, I wasn't disheartened. Not giving the monster any time to attack, I lunged forward, my killing intent soaring to the sky. I launched another cosmic attack from the monster's blind side, though he seemed to have seen it coming as another shadow promptly appeared, causing both energies to get nullified. Just as that happened, I had already reached the abomination's right side. I exerted strength in my back legs and leapt up, coating my claw with cosmic mana as I delivered my strike. This was my true aim since the beginning. The first couple of attacks were just distractions. It was nothing but a harmless attempt. I didn't hold much hope for them to cause any damage in the first place. In the first place, this is not my fight, I inwardly mumbled. Faced with my attack, the monster took one large step back and spun around. Its four big wings morphed with the dark mana as they seemed to merge into one whip that blocked my claw. Boom! A loud deafening bang occurred as the cave shook, causing debris to fall from all sides. It seemed like it was about to collapse from the force of our clash. Just then, the whip that the monster used suddenly shook before it reverted into four large wings. This time, however, their color was not a truly dark one, it seemed more tainted than before. The monster was enraged as it tried to retreat, yet I did not allow it and instead pressed on. The difference between my current method of attacking and my previous one was that I now managed to make contact, or more precisely, have my cosmic mana make contact. The monster was constantly surrounded by a layer of dark mana. It was akin to a second skin, which meant I wasn't even seeing his true form since dark mana was continuously protecting him. When I tested the waters with long-ranged attacks, the monster nullified them using his mana. Still, he was not forced to use the one that surrounded his body. Once I made direct contact, however, his second layer of skin was the one that got nullified alongside the cosmic mana that coated my claws. Although it would not take long for it to regenerate for both of us, I had something the monster did not. Cidus! I yelled out as I continuously launched a barrage of attacks using the various parts of my body coated with cosmic mana to create the opportunity my little brother needed, and that was to regain control over the dark mana. Cidus did not disappoint. With each clash, whenever the monster's mana would get nullified, his connection to it would also get lowered for a split second. Cidus was using that to summon the dark mana to him. Slowly but surely, a large black shadow extended from behind him, appearing like a dark blanket that threatened to swallow everything inside. The monster, on the other hand, looked more and more pitiful. His color dimmed as his appearance looked to be tainted. It was constantly letting our enraged roars, but to no avail. I did not stop my attacks, and Cidus did not give him any time to recover. It was perfect teamwork. Once I sensed that the monster was significantly weakened, and once it stopped being able to regenerate the dark mana at a fast rate, I decisively stepped back and Cidus rushed in to deliver the final blow. We didn't need to talk, yet our moves were in sync. The moment I moved back was the moment he dashed in. His two claws seemed to morph into two giant scythes that cut at the monster's head and torso. It moved its wings to shield itself, but by now it was already too weak. Cidus' attack landed true, and the monster's body was split into two halves. It didn't have the time to let out its final scream as it fell to the ground in silence. I glanced at the scene in curiosity as the monster's body slowly evaporated into dark mist. The mist slowly edged towards Cidus and seeped inside his body. He closed his eyes as a content smile appeared on his face. To my surprise, a small part of the mist moved towards me and flowed between my scales before it disappeared. What was that? Chapter 132, Concerns. The dark mist that seeped inside my body did not make me feel anything special. A frown quickly made its way onto my face as I closed my eyes and entered my soul space. The blue sky greeted me. My incomplete statue was still standing in its place right in the middle of the world. A small green hill now stood in a corner, a large contrast in comparison to the blue world. I quickly turned my head towards a different corner of the world. A small insignificant area was now masked in the shadows. The area was extremely small in the grand scheme of things, but it was nonetheless still present. So that's where the mist went to, I nodded before turning my head and scanning my surroundings. I had many doubts about the soul space in general. Firstly, why did it look like this? Secondly, the mana elements, they looked no different than when they were in the outside world, but it was an undeniable fact that they change once they enter my soul space. This brings me to my third point concerning said change. Once these elements join my soul space, they no longer seem to be bound to the mana stream of the outside world. Though when I use my soul space, I can still make them influence it to a certain degree, which allows me to in turn manipulate the elements of the stream. It's similar to how my cosmic mana works. A thread from my soul space reaches out to the outer world, forming a connection of sorts that helps me draw more power from the elements. It was an interesting method, and with it, I came to understand how certain points work. Firstly, the amount of mana inside my soul space helps me draw more elements from the outside world, which means the larger it is, the better for me. Now what I failed to understand was, if my use of mana was directly related to my soul space, then how come I was able to use it before I even had a soul space? And my final issue was the fact that we were drawing elements from the stream. Wasn't this harmful to it? Was it really okay for us to tame these elements and make them part of our little world? For the first part, I had a certain theory, though I wasn't completely sure if it was a correct one. Nonetheless, it seems like the most plausible, at least for now. My guess is that or rather we can draw the power of the stream without the use of a soul space. This is proven by the fact that I, alongside my siblings, were able to use magic before we gained our soul space. Soul space, on the other hand, works as a sort of amplifier. It boosts our connection to said stream by utilizing tamed elements, ones that reside within us, and it depends on the number of said elements that decide by how much our connection to the stream is enhanced. At least that's how I understood it. Another bonus of the soul space is the fact that it can help us establish new affinities with different elements. This point was also proven by the fact that I had now gained a minor affinity to the earth element. I am not sure if this was the same for all dragons, but at least for me, it seems to be true. Now, with the appearance of the small shadows at the corner of my soul space, I guess that I should obtain a somewhat of a connection to the dark element. I don't hold too high of hopes for said connection since the amount I absorbed is insignificant, though it's still better than nothing, and above all, it's a start, so I'm already satisfied with what I have. Now for my last issue, I still wasn't sure about it. I did not hold enough knowledge to make a judgment over whether drawing the elements into our soul space was in any way harmful to the stream, or not. This was something that I had to confirm with the elders. After observing the small shadows for a little while longer, and after confirming there were no problems nor any significant changes inside my little world, I swiftly exited my soul space. Cidus was patiently waiting for me. I nodded at him before asking, "Are you ready to go back?" "Yes, brother, I need some time to adjust," he said. He didn't need to elaborate for me to understand. His gains from our previous battle must have been quite significant. I nodded approvingly before turning around and slowly making my way towards the exit with him in tow. This time, it didn't take us too long before we managed to leave the giant crevice. The sun shone brightly in the sky above, making my scales glitter a bit. Cidus's dark scales, on the other hand, seemed to swallow all light. A yawn escaped my mouth as I turned my gaze ahead before exerting strength in my back limbs, causing cracks to appear on the ground below. I then instantly launched myself to the sky like a meteor. Cidus was right behind me, though his takeoff was silent. The way back was silent. None of us said anything as the scenery below continued to change. After landing back at the edge of the floating mountain, Cidus looked at me and bowed his head in respect before speaking. "Thank you for your help, brother." Hearing his sincere thank you, a smile made its way to my face as I nodded. "Don't mention it." He did not say anything else and simply turned around and made his way back towards the cave. Once he disappeared inside, I raised my head to scan the sky above the mountain. Essie's figure was still missing. A sigh escaped my mouth before I shook my head. The sun was still high in the sky, and although a part of me wanted to lay down and take a nap, another part was tempted to go out and play. Maybe I can visit grandmother first. I can also use this to ask her about the part of drawing mana into our soul space, and how was it any different than what that monster did? I frowned when I thought about that. Yeah, let's do that. I'll ask Grandma first. With my mind made up, I once again launched myself to the sky. This time my destination was grandmother's abode. Chapter 133, The Cursed Language. Now that I was familiar with the area a bit better, it didn't take me long before I finally reached my destination. I slowly circled the small stream, but grandmother's figure was nowhere to be seen. Maybe she's deeper inside the forest, I inwardly mumbled before continuing to make my way there. I once again passed through the damp cave and left it to enter the ancient forest. The second I stepped foot in there, a smile subconsciously made its way to my face. I felt at ease in this place, as it helped that I was finally able to sense my grandmother's presence up ahead. The leaves rustled beneath my claws as I made my way through the trees. A contented smile stretched across my face as I enjoyed the light rays of sun that passed through the layers of leaves, lightly illuminating the area. Not long after, I found myself in a familiar clearing. Grandmother was in her humanoid form, standing with her back towards me. She seemed to be deep in thought as she studied a strange object that was situated on top of the large rock. Her ears perked up and she turned to smile at me before speaking. "Oh, if it isn't little Ether. What happened? Miss me already?" she asked with a chuckle before turning her head towards the foreign object. I leisurely walked over to stand next to her and glanced at it in interest. "Hello, Grandma, I'm here to visit," I answered with a smile. You cheeky little lizard, what visit? I can already see that you got something on your mind," she said with a laugh, her eyes never quite leaving the object. I lightly chuckled at her straightforwardness before replying, "Haha, that's just secondary, the main reason is to see how you are doing." I spoke with a serious tone, to which Grandma simply shook her head with a smile. "Speaking of which, what is this thing, Grandma?" The object she was seriously studying was in the shape of a triangle. It was covered with mysterious symbols that made my head hurt simply by looking at them. Its color was a dull brown, yet a shiny green gem was embedded in the middle of it. Hearing my question, Grandmother shook her head to indicate that she didn't know either. "I managed to grab a hold of this thing after a fight with the shades, but I'm not sure what it is. It's strangely sturdy though," she said, and as if to prove her statement, her hand turned into a silver claw that held into the strange triangle. I then watched as she exerted strength trying to crush it, but to no avail. Seeing that, a frown quickly made its way to my face, and that was because I knew how strong my grandmother was. She was able to breed fear into my father and easily subdue him, so her strength was the real deal. But even she was unable to break the strange triangle. "Those symbols look familiar," my frown deepened before I raised my eyes in understanding. What's wrong?" asked my grandmother, her hand turning back into a normal humanoid one devoid of any sharp claws. She then gently set the triangle back down on the large rock. "These symbols, I think I saw them before once," I explained. "Oh, you already encountered the cursed language?" asked grandmother in a surprised tone. "The cursed language?" I subconsciously asked. "That's what these symbols are called, they being to the language of the shades," said grandmother, her finger gently caressing the surface of the triangle, tracing the carved symbols before she continued her explanation. "The shades are different from us. Well, they are different from every race, to be fair. Their society is also quite different. Most of them have no use for something like a common language since they are nothing but mere brutes. The problem, however, is with those that pretend to be otherwise. They are the ones that invented the cursed language. Remember to be very careful, Ether. If you ever encounter a shade that can communicate, then run. As you are now, don't even think about fighting, just run." Her expression turned serious for a second as I felt her aura steer before she reined it in. I subconsciously nodded before replying, "I understand." I didn't argue with her, nor did I even ask why I had to run, and not even try to put up a fight. No, there was no use in asking. If Grandma is this serious, then a shade at this level must be very dangerous. Perhaps I won't even get the chance to run. A shiver ran down my spine as I recalled the mysterious ancient door that seemed to seal a dangerous presence and the old dragon that acted as the gatekeeper. Grandmother nodded in satisfaction at my reply before asking, "So where did you encounter the cursed language before?" "It's like this minus," and so I slowly recounted everything that had happened to me in Cidus, our journey to the crevice, the ancient door, the old dragon, the dangerous feeling I sensed at that time. I told her everything without hiding anything. By the time I finished, grandmother had a melancholic expression on her face. Her gaze was hazy as she seemed to recall a distant memory. After a while, a sigh escaped her lips before she shook her head. She then grabbed the triangle and sat down on the large rock before speaking. Neelath is an old comrade. He is a remarkable dragon, one that deserves respect. Back when he was at his peak, his strength surpassed mine and the old lizard combined. Grandmother's face turned gloomy as she once again shook her head in regret. The presence that's sealed behind that door is exactly one of the said monsters of the shades, one that can communicate, a cunning monster. Saying that, grandmother refrained from adding anything else. For a while, a strange silence descended on the clearing. "So, what is it that you wanted to ask me?" she asked, breaking the awkward silence. "Ah yes, grandmother, I'm curious about our soul space. I noticed something rather strange and I would like it if you could help me clear out some misunderstandings," I said, to which she gently nodded as if she had been expecting that. "Let me guess, it's about the elements residing inside your soul space, to be exact, right?" "Yes," I hastily replied. How did she know that that's what I wanted to ask? I wondered. Chapter 134, Above It All. Grandma slowly nodded with a gentle smile before her body morphed back to her original dragon form. She was quite small, even smaller than me, but hidden behind that small body was an explosive strength enough to humble even my father. She flapped her wings and rose to the sky without making so much as a sound. Her gaze then turned towards me as I felt her mana surround my body and gently carry me off the ground. I didn't need to fly or do anything and simply allowed myself to get carried away. "Grandma, where are we going?" I curiously asked, to which she simply smiled and calmly replied, "A place where you can see the entire picture." Before I had any time to ask her what she meant, our speed instantly picked up as we turned into two flashes of light that streaked through the sky, leaving a blazing trail behind. Even so, I still did not need to do anything and simply allowed her mana to drag me along. I watched as we gradually rose higher from the ground, our destination seemingly outer space. My heart thumped loudly in my chest as we kept rising higher and higher, Grandma having no intentions of slowing down. The wind that was supposed to assault me was blocked by her mana, encompassing me within an invisible barrier of sorts. "Grandma?" I called out hesitantly. Her usual gentle smile still hung on her face as we continued flying without any disturbances whatsoever. We moved unhurriedly, almost as if we were simply going for a stroll. Seeing how grandmother had no intentions of explaining things any further, I turned my attention back to the land below and watched as everything grew smaller and smaller. It was my first time reaching this height, and all I could see below was our continent. I couldn't even catch a glimpse of the sea whatsoever. Instead, I managed to find the abnormally large lake situated near our floating mountain. "Damn, it's huge," I inwardly mumbled as I scanned the land. Soon, however, everything became nothing but a small dot. I subconsciously raised my head only to pause in surprise and awe. The sky appeared as if it was divided in half. The lower part was the familiar blue color, while above it was the abyssal black color of space. For a second I wasn't able to move my gaze from the scene as I watched the world change while we stepped out of our planet's atmosphere. Not long after, even the blue disappeared below me, as an abnormally large planet was left behind. Yet grandmother still didn't stop. Instead, she picked up her speed, causing us to move away from the blue planet at a faster rate. Soon, its entire shape was visible before me. Grandmother then finally slowed down before she drew closer to me. My eyes were still glued to the blue pearl we had just left before I unconsciously moved my head to scan our surroundings. Behind us, the sun shone brightly, while the moon floated on the other side. A frown quickly made its way to my mind as I realized something. I was still okay. I didn't feel any discomfort being here. I didn't feel any temperature change. I didn't even the heat of the sun rays from behind me. Quite the opposite, everything was pleasant as if I was still on the planet. This must be grandmother's doing, I inwardly noted as I glanced at the mana shield that surprisingly still surrounded me even after we left the planet. This brought me to another point. I had completely lost contact with all the other elements. The only thing I could sense stronger than ever was the cosmic element. As for the water element, earth element, the ones that remained were those tamed within my soul space, which gave me a vague sense that I could only use those in here. Still, I wasn't quite sure about the level of impact any attack would have in here. I could very vaguely sense the darkness element as well, though since my affinity to it was almost negligible, I could barely feel it. "So this is outer space," I mumbled, still in awe. Very faint stars were spread in all directions, their light extremely dull, almost insignificant in the dark space. Grandmother remained silent as she watched over the blue planet below us. For a while, nobody spoke. I was still immersed in the new scenery. Everything was Completely different from this point of view. Everything looked so small and insignificant, the planet, the moon, the sun. Us. After a while, grandmother broke the silence. Her voice reverberated directly in my mind. You see that little planet below, that's your home, little ether. I slowly nodded. A small part of me couldn't help but think back to a similar blue-looking planet, one that I also once called home. Grandma then calmly continued speaking. In the grand scheme of things, we are all quite trivial, she said with a sigh. This is what some of us sometimes forget. Confidence and pride are good, blind arrogance and overconfidence on the other hand will only lead you to an early grave. Remember that, little ether, remember that, and remember the scene before you. See how small you truly are in the grand scale of everything. I slowly nodded to indicate my understanding. For some reason, grandmother at this time looked quite lonely standing there. A sad smile hung on her face as she overlooked everything. I wanted to say something, but the moment my mouth opened, no words came out. I didn't know what to say. You asked me about the difference between us and the shades, she continued. To put it in simple terms, the shades sever the connection of the elements and corrupt it, turning the elements into things that should not be. Her body then morphed back into that of a human as she continued her explanation almost as if nothing happened. Us, on the other hand, can be considered a part of everything, a part of the stream, and a part of the mana. When you build your soul space and fill it up with elements, you don't completely erase that connection they have with the stream. No, you can consider it like the elements changing owners while still remaining under the same roof. Do you understand? She asked with a gentle smile as she turned her head towards me. Somewhat, I answered. Don't worry too much, little ether, there are still many things you don't know, and many more you'll eventually learn with due time. You just have to be patient and take your time with everything. Don't try to jump stages. While I admit you are talented, you still lack a direction, a goal. You are merely going with the flow. First, find something you want to do, figure that out first. To do that, you need to understand yourself. Saying that, her eyes seemed to look right through me as she asked, do you know yourself, ether? Chapter 135, her goal. Do you know yourself, ether? Grandma's words still resounded in my ears long after we landed back in the secluded forest. She was leaning against the large rock in the middle of the clearing, basking under the sun while enjoying a rainbow-colored fruit in her human form. I, on the other hand, was still out of it. I couldn't help but think back to her question. Did I know myself? Grandma was right. I still lacked a sense of direction, an actual goal per se. Ever since I was born in this new world, I was mostly going with the flow. The countless trials, the rite of passage, the destruction of Pia. I was following orders while trying not to think too much into them. I sighed as I began to walk away from the clearing. Grandmother didn't say anything to stop me and simply watched me go with a gentle smile. I bowed my head in respect and walked away. I didn't fly, no, I wanted to walk. The leaves crackled beneath my claws as a gentle wind caressed my scales. Faint rays of sunlight shone from between the tree branches, forming a soothing scenery. I slowly wandered about aimlessly, my mind drifting to my various encounters, my first fight, my meeting with Amanita, my naming ceremony, my rite of passage. Everything floated in my mind like a dream, and for the first time, I found myself wondering, what do I want to do? As a dragon, it seems like the natural course of things is to grow stronger and eventually fight off against the shades to protect the planet, akin to a guardian of sorts, all the while safeguarding the balance and the mana stream. That's what a dragon is supposed to do, an honorable goal. But is that what I want to do? I inwardly mumbled. Up to this point, I didn't question anything. I didn't question what was right and what was wrong. I simply took things as they came and went with the flow, as Grandma mentioned. But is that a bad thing? I quickly found myself wondering about that. Just as I started thinking about it, my mind subconsciously recalled the scene of the Pia Knights throwing themselves against me in helpless suicidal attacks, hoping to stop me for at least a second. They all knew it was hopeless and almost all of them were terrified, yet they still fought to their last breath because of their conviction. They had something they wanted to protect, their friends, their lovers, their children. Was that really the right choice? I mumbled. My feet carried me to the edge of the forest where I came across a small hidden waterfall. A sigh escaped my mouth as I lay down next to the waterfall. The rhythmic sound of water crashing against the large boulder was soothing. I raised my head to glance at the sky, my mind still filled with the scenes of destruction I had caused in the Pia Kingdom. The whole rite of passage mission seemed to have been influenced by Father's drive for revenge. Still, most of the humans I killed were sinless, at least in this matter, so what type of revenge did I carry? Another long sigh escaped my mouth. My feelings concerning the humans felt a lot more muddled ever since my reincarnation. The more I accepted my newfound instincts, the more twisted my point of view became. At first, I followed orders without questioning them since I figured that's how things are, and I who was born as a dragon in this life had to get used to it. And I reached a point where I treated human life like trash. We weren't on the same plane. Just my train of thought began to delve into that direction once again. I recalled what grandmother had told my father once before. Every life matters to someone, boy, just like how Amanita mattered to you and to that damned old lizard. Her words still resounded in my ears. Every life matters to someone. The more I thought about this whole situation, the more conflicted I became. My dragonic instincts were indifferent to the massacre I had committed, treating it as if it was nothing. My rational side still felt that it was too much, that maybe things could have developed differently had I not been so passive about everything. As if sensing my sour mood, the surrounding water mana began to gather around my body in what looked like an attempt to cheer me up. The elements danced around me, some tickling my scales while others morphed into various forms that swirled around me. A weary smile made its way to my face at that scene. I slowly extended my claw and gently caressed a humanoid-shaped element. I can't change the past in the eyes of the humans. I'm now a devil responsible for Pia's tragedy. Most of them still don't know why I attacked. They still don't know what they are doing wrong, and they still don't know that their use of mana is harmful to the stream. I lowered my claw and fell in deep thought. None of the other dragons seemed to have any intentions nor interest in correcting their wrongs, or guiding them towards a better path. Ah, what am I saying? What guiding them towards a better path after all I did? I shook my head with a frown. How hypocritical, I sighed. Glancing at my surroundings for a final time, I then swiftly launched myself towards the sky and made my way back home. My mind was still a mess as I found myself thinking of various things I was avoiding up until now. Once I landed in front of the cave's entrance, Imi, who was basking under the sun, glanced at me with a curious gaze and surprisingly took the initiative to speak as she asked, "What's wrong with you, older brother? You look conflicted." Glancing at her, I sighed and instead of walking into the cave chose to walk over and sit down by her side. For a while, I didn't say anything, and neither did she press me for anything. We just sat there basking under the sun's glow. "Imi," I called out. Do you have a goal?" I asked. She turned to look at me for a second before answering. "A goal, huh? I suppose I want to learn more about the humans," she replied, causing me to look at her in surprise. "The humans? How come?" "Our first inheritance, the memories of the dragon I relived, belonged to one that was worshipped by the humans. He lived amongst them, helped them when they encountered any problems. Through his eyes, I watched the humans, their civilization, their customs, their habits." She paused for a second before continuing. "Before I was pulled out of the inheritance, I saw something I didn't understand. The humans that once worshipped the dragon turned against him. They turned their swords and spears and attacked him. There was no sign of the respect they once held towards him. Before I could understand what had happened, I was abruptly pulled out of the dream. Desperate to find out what had occurred, I went off to hunt another monster, one even stronger than the previous one, hoping that my immersion would be longer." A sigh escaped her mouth as she continued. "Who would have thought that father would not agree? And so because of that, I want to learn just what sort of existences are the humans, and what exactly happened before. That's my goal." I'm not sure if any noticed, but the chapter referred to is chapter 20, when Imi hunted another werewolf trying to go back to the nightmarish realm. Chapter 136, The Past. Hearing Imi talk about her goal, I couldn't help but recall the conversation grandmother had with my father the first time I met her. Father's entire revenge against the humans was because of Amanita. I think he said something along the lines of them turning against him. I wasn't quite sure, but I do remember grandmother saying that the humans were not at fault for what happened. Linking that and what Imi saw in her ancestral memory, it seemed like there was once a time when dragons and humans once lived side by side and got along with each other. Thinking about that, I was once again reminded of the ruined city a distance away from our floating mountain. I was able to see glimpses of the past over there, the once bustling city full of people from all races and backgrounds living side by side. I remember the scene of a monstrous presence invading, only to be faced by an army of dragons. I remembered the dark mist seeping from beyond the void and into the city, tainting all of its residents and turning them into mindless monsters. Is everything the doing of the shades? I found myself wondering. Wait, you said the memory of one dragon, do you mean you only lived through one memory? I suddenly asked with a frown as I glanced at Imi. She, in turn, brought her attention back to me and seriously nodded. Aren't you the same brother? Oh. Noticing my complicated gaze, Imi must have understood as she simply nodded in understanding before speaking. I see, I always knew you were special, brother, but to think you were this blessed, I can't help but feel envious at your good luck, she lightly grumbled, causing my eyes to widen. This was my first time seeing Emmy make that sort of expression. Needless to say, I was surprised. Good luck, you say? I'm not sure about that, I chuckled helplessly. While it was true that I was fortunate enough in my second life, it wasn't so easy. All of the trials, constantly being at the edge around my father, mother, hell, sometimes even around Cidus or Enos. I was constantly putting on a front of a talented son, one that my parents could be proud of. A front of a reliable older brother, one that held the respect of his little siblings. Before I knew it, I was too deep into this facade that I created for myself. Perhaps it wasn't right, but if there was one thing I was sure about, and that was that I did not want to be left alone in this world as well. Maybe that was the reason I blindly followed the orders of my father, never once questioning if they were right or wrong. Deep down, I longed for his acknowledgement. It didn't matter to me that my current father was a dragon. I just did not want to be left alone again. The pain of losing my parents in my old world still haunts me to this day. Embracing my dragonic instincts and trying to shed away my old human self helped me forget about that past, about the time I spent in solitude. I had shut myself off the world. Ever since my parents' murder, my hope, my faith in humanity dwindled. Every day that passed with the culprits running freely outside while my parents, it felt like a knife was tearing me from the inside. I was filled with guilt. The only thing I could do was drown myself in games, books, and stories while giving up on the world. A heavy sigh escaped my mouth as I raised my head to glance at the sky. Memories I thought I had long since discarded resurfaced, causing my mood to turn heavy. Emmy must have noticed, since she refrained from saying anything and simply laid down next to me. What I did before was a cowardly choice. I chose to hide and disregard the outside world. Was that right or wrong? I didn't know. I was sure there were other people out there with less fortunate circumstances than mine, people that suffered worse fates, yet they still chose to not give up, to continue forward. But for better or worse, I wasn't one of the said people. I couldn't get past my parents' death. I couldn't accept it. Why did it have to be them? Why was our home the one invaded that day? Why did they have to die? Why was I left alone? So many questions, so many regrets. Memories and feelings I tried to suppress and bury deep within me burst out like a flood. I'm still a coward, am I not? I inwardly mumbled with a self-mocking chuckle. Nothing had changed from before. I was still a weak coward. Maybe that's why I tried to forget everything ever since I came to this world. Maybe that's why I accepted and embraced my new dragonic side. I didn't want to be lonely anymore. Another self-loathing sigh escaped my mouth as I shook my head. How pathetic. Just because I didn't want to feel the same way, I chose to forget everything. I chose to ignore everything as if it didn't happen. Pathetic, I really am pathetic. I took a deep breath as a gentle breeze tickled my scales. I soon found myself thinking about everything I chose to forget. For the first time since coming to this world, my more rational side overwhelmed my dragonic instincts. Feelings I didn't want to feel again assaulted me. Really pathetic. I whispered under my breath as I lowered my head and curled around myself, using my large wings to cover my face. What am I even doing? Everything I did so far, what was the point of it all? In the end, even after coming to this world, I am still as pathetic as ever. It was then that I felt a small force pushing itself against my wings, moving them to the side. Soon, a tiny cute green head with large adorable eyes stared at me. Big brother Ether. You're back, smiled Essie before she buried herself deeper and nudged her face against mine. After that, she quickly hopped onto her favorite spot on top of my head, rendering me speechless. For a second I didn't know how to react as I felt the weight of her tiny head on top of mine. A wary smile made its way to my face as a sigh escaped my lips before I closed my eyes to rest. Chapter 137, Future Plans. By the time I woke up, the sky had already turned dark. The sun was nowhere to be seen as a blanket of stars cast a gentle glow on the world below. A yawn escaped my mouth as I glanced at my surroundings. Essie was curled up by my side peacefully sleeping, while Emmy was nowhere to be found. I guess she retreated to the cave, I inwardly mumbled, after which I gently held Essie in my arm and carried her inside as well. Her eyes fluttered open as a yawn escaped her mouth before she asked, older brother? It's okay, just go back to sleep, I replied with a smile, to which she simply nodded and snuggled closer to my arm. Once inside the cave, I was momentarily surprised to see that mother and father were both missing. They must be busy, I noted. Cidus was peacefully sleeping next to his small pyramid of fairy skulls, while Imi was resting under an opening in the ceiling, from which faint moonlight seeped inside, lightly illuminating her white scales. Cidus, on the other hand, was playing with dark mana in the corner of the cave, as the shadows seemed to envelop him within, giving him a sinister feel. Sensing my presence, he raised his head in my direction and gave a slight nod before turning back to continue playing with the mana. I strode forward to my usual spot and gently laid Essie down before I turned to scan the cave. I was not sleepy anymore, quite the opposite. Now that I woke up, my mind subconsciously drifted back to the dilemma I was facing. A sigh escaped my mouth as I made my way outside. Maybe a walk will help me clear my mind, I mumbled. The trail down the mountain wasn't very hard to trek as I leisurely made my way down to the foot. A small forest with sparse trees greeted me. Though it was dark, it wasn't a problem for me to see, almost as if it was the day. I slowly continued all the way towards the edge of the floating mountain, my mind still a mess. Standing at the ledge and staring at the world below, I found myself thinking about various things. Though what I did was bad, I admit that there was no honor in killing sinless and helpless people who cannot even fight back. I, unfortunately, did not feel that much guilt about it. I could only attribute this to the fact that I had allowed my dragonic senses to overwhelm my rational side for far too long. Still, although most would consider it selfish or even hypocritical, I did not want to turn into a mindless, emotionless killing machine. I was already on the borderline of that. Though most of my affection and feelings were towards my siblings, I did not want to treat the other races as disposables. Grandmother had a point, we don't get to decide on whether or not an entire race should live or die, that should be left to them. Our job is to simply protect the balance and defend the plane. But for that to be done, I still think someone should explain to the humans that the way they are handling mana is wrong, else I don't think they'll ever learn. Which means there will come a time where another dragon might just outright annihilate them, I mumbled as the gentle night breeze tickled my scales. The problem is, I'm sure I'm already quite well known in the human continent after I destroyed Pia, so me teaching them is not going to go well. Just as I was thinking about that, my mind subconsciously drifted back to Imi, who said she was interested in learning more about the humans. That's right. We can do that, I muttered as a plan began to formulate in my mind. Imi in more ways than one had the appearance of a holy messenger with her shining white scales, elegant demeanor and undeniable presence that commanded respect. I was sure that she could easily play the part of a messenger sent to teach the ignorant humans. The problem is that Imi is at the end of the day a dragon, and considering how a dragon, me, destroyed a country, all the other kingdoms should be on full alert against us, hence why there is no guarantee that they won't launch a full-blown attack against Imi the moment she appears. Now the question was, how to make the humans trust and respect Imi. The answer came to me relatively easy, that was to give them a common enemy. A grin slowly made its way across my face as I thought to myself, and what better enemy than the blue dragon that destroyed the Pia kingdom? The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. The idea obviously still needed a lot more planning, and I still needed to get Imi to agree onto the whole thing. Still, I was quite confident. I will try to help the humans. This will be my way of trying to redeem myself after all that I had done. For their sake, I shall become the devil, while Imi will become their shining light, their beacon hope. I'll make sure of it. Still, we will have to be swift. Although destroying Pia was not that hard, I couldn't be arrogant if the whole human realm was to gather under one banner to fight me. I wasn't sure I'd be able to get out of it unscathed, hence why the best way to handle this was to take them by surprise. I'll have to ask mother or father about more details of the human realm and their kingdoms, I inwardly noted. Who knows, maybe I'll even end up learning more about my goals and what I want to do. I sighed and shook my head as I tried to rid myself of the depressing thoughts of the past that threatened to swallow me once again. That was then, and this is now. Everything is different. I'm different. I'm no longer alone this time, I mumbled to myself as the cute figure of Essie flashed through my mind, followed by the proud figure of Cidus, the headstrong Cidus, and the graceful Imi. Yes, I'm no longer alone. I took a deep breath before launching myself off the edge of the floating mountain and into the darkness below. Chapter 138, The Human Realm. It has been about a week or so since my mental breakdown. During the past few days, my parents surprisingly didn't come back yet, which meant only us siblings were left behind in the floating mountain. Though it was strange, I didn't think too much of it since they could be busy fighting the shades or patrolling the planet's borders. The only noteworthy thing in the past week was that Essie finally regained her courage and reverted to her cheerful self, as she once again began her flight experiments while dragging along a few unfortunate souls so they could experience the joy of flying. Cidus gained an uncanny attachment to his earth golems, so much that he even refrained from challenging any of us to a fight. I have to admit, it was petty strange seeing him so tame as he tried to work on his control over the golems. Imi was still as lazy as ever, she hardly even moved as she enjoyed spending most of her day basking under the sun. Cidus, on the other hand, spends the days sleeping while going out during the night. What does he or where does he go? I have no idea. When it came to me, I once again went back to the only person I knew that held the information I needed about the human kingdoms, Grandma. According to her, 5 countries remained after my destruction of Pia. The Lumia Empire, which is situated in the north and hailed as the most powerful out of the 5 countries, it has borders with all the kingdoms except for the recently destroyed Pia kingdom. With harsh cold weather and headstrong people, the empire has no lack of outstanding warriors that help them dominate the #1 position. Then to the east is the Cidus dynasty, with borders against the Lumia Empire and the tainted kingdom to the south. It's considered the second most powerful nation, coming a bit short of the Lumia Empire. Though, unlike its counterpart, the Cidus dynasty is blessed with green plains and fertile lands. Since both nations' strengths are quite similar to one another, small-scaled battles and skirmishes are never ending around the borders. Due to its lacking strength, the tainted kingdom in the south tries to keep itself neutral and avoids joining in on the conflict between the two nations. Bordering it to the west is the Rimmer kingdom, an allied kingdom with similar strength, and further south is the late Pia kingdom. The final nation is situated at the far northwest of the continent, bordering both the Lumia Empire and the Rimmer Kingdom, the Yader Empire, a mostly vast desert country with hot climates. From what I understood, their political situation is a bit complicated. They are in a hostile state with both the Lumia and Rimmer nations, and in an alliance with the Cidus dynasty. The reason for their war against the Rimmer Kingdom is that they claim that the Bryle region originally belongs to them and that they should it's the rightful owners. As for their conflict with the Lumia Empire, the two countries have a history of bad blood between them. According to Grandmother, a princess of the Lumia Empire who was supposed to be wed to a Yader prince ended up breaking the engagement, claiming that she couldn't marry a useless prince with no battle achievements nor merits to his name. Hearing that, I was momentarily dumbfounded, as the entire thing sounded like the plot of a cliché revenge story where the said prince will rise through the ranks gathering merits left and right, all for the eventual goal of washing away his shame. A chuckle escaped my mouth as I found myself imagining an entire plot. I shook my head, ridding myself of such thoughts. Sadly for him, the prince never got a chance to work for his revenge, as not even a week after the Lumian princess broke the engagement, he was assassinated. This sparked a war between both nations, with the Yader side claiming that the Lumia Empire was behind the assassination. Now what most people don't know, and surprisingly Grandmother for some reason does, is that the assassination was an elaborate plot from the Cidus dynasty to get the Lumia Empire to start another war, further weakening them, as they used this to form an alliance with the Yader Empire, attacking Lumia from both sides. This was the general situation of the human continent. Still, with the destruction of Pia, the nations came to a united ceasefire, with ambassadors working from all sides to come to an agreement against the new threat that emerged. Unfortunately for them, previous tensions couldn't simply be forgotten. Even with a bigger problem at hand, the nations were still at each other's throats. Meanwhile, the famed academy, previously said to have been responsible for the death of 2 of our younglings, closed itself from the outside world, barricading its island, almost as if they were sure I would come for them. The last thing to take note of is the other races' situation. The numbers of elves and demons dwindled significantly ever since their long-lost war, where the Dragon King himself intervened. This forced them to come under the rule of the humans, who treated themselves as a superior race, forcing the others into slavery. It was almost impossible to find a free demon or elf. I shook my head at that notion. I didn't particularly care about one race more than another, as my dragonic side treated all of the mortal races the same. In this era the humans were the dominant ones, but who is to say they will always remain as such? Back to my plan. With the negotiations and talks going nowhere, the monarchs of each nation have decided to hold a meeting on neutral ground to discuss the current situation face to face. The land that was decided on was none other than the recently destroyed Pia kingdom. I was honestly quite surprised with their decision. Why would they go to a place where a dragon has just flattened? According to Grandmother, the decision was made by the Church of the Dragon God, which has just seen an explosive rise both in status and power. The church claims that the Pia kingdom was destroyed since they angered the Dragon God, who sent his messenger, me, to warn them. Still, Pia refused to repent for their sins and did not listen to reason, so they ended being destroyed by said messenger, once again, me. This earned me the nickname of the Harbinger of Death. The church even began preaching that should the blue Harbinger of Death come calling for a kingdom, then the countdown for its destruction had already begun. Naturally, the monarchs of the human nations were quite unhappy about this development, but since the people had started to believe in the church praying for salvation, the influence it held skyrocketed. The situation was a lot more complicated, but that's the general gist of things. And if I was being honest, I couldn't say that I was unhappy with the current development of things, quite the opposite. The emergence of the Dragon God Church served to facilitate most of my goals. Interesting. Chapter 139, Training. I took a deep breath and focused on erasing my presence. I refrained from touching my cosmic mana as the whole point was for me to train my new Earth affinity. Glancing at the obsidian monster feasting on the corpse of what looked like an oversized deer, I slowly made my way around it, closing the distance between us. My range of attacks using Earth mana was decent, though the farther away from my target the lower my fire point, hence why it was best to close the distance before attacking, especially now with my current low affinity. I reached out to the earth elements as they slowly encompassed me, helping me further hide my presence. The mountainous terrain was to my advantage as the earth mana was abundant, hence why it was relatively easy to fool the monster's senses. 1 step, 2 steps, 3 steps, I silently crept behind the monster using the various rocks along the way to hide my massive form. The tainted dark monster was relatively large as well, with a figure similar to that of a tiger. Where its eyes should have been were 2 fiery blue orbs crackling madly as it devoured its prey. I did not feel any sense of reason from the monster as it continued to enjoy its meal. The repulsive sensation its body gave off was the same as that of the countless tainted monsters in this mountain range. Thinking about that, my mind fell into deep thought as I recalled the memory I saw back in the destroyed ancient city. The descent of the shades, the army of dragons, and the dark mist that corrupted the mortals and animals that used to live there. Perhaps this monster was one of the victims of that time, I inwardly mumbled as my mind moved into such useless thoughts. Shaking my head, I took a silent deep breath to calm my emotions and get myself to focus back on the hunt. I slowly moved away from my hiding spot, behind a giant rock, and moved towards another. My vision of the monster was now hindered. Still, I was calm. Good, just like that, I silently encouraged myself before I readied my body to move out from behind my cover. The second I did, however, my eyes widened and my body froze. 2 fiery blue orbs were staring at me with madness hidden behind them. I panicked and subconsciously reached out to my cosmic mana. The mutated tiger instantly lost its head and plopped to the ground with a loud thud. My heart was still racing in my chest from that sudden jump scare as I begrudgingly kicked the monster's corpse with my tail, sending it flying a distance away. Fuck, I cursed before taking another deep breath to calm myself. Another failure. Training my earth mana was more complicated than I had anticipated. The reason for it was simple. My low affinity towards it makes my body's first reaction when encountering danger is to use my strongest or easiest to access affinity, which means I end up using cosmic or water mana and neglecting earth mana. This throws me in a vicious cycle where I hardly ever make any progress in training my earth affinity. I grumbled as I threw the decapitated corpse one final look before I took to the skies to search for my next practice target. I still did not go back to the floating mountain even after I decided on my plan. It still wasn't time to go through with it. Firstly, I was still too young and still lacked experience. One of the reasons my first hit on the humans went so smoothly was the fact that it was a surprise attack they didn't anticipate, and I also didn't give them any time to react. Now, however, the entire continent was on guard against me, so it wasn't very smart to show my face there at the moment. Who knows what sort of hidden trump cards the humans may have. I already learned my lesson to not underestimate an opponent, so I wasn't going to act stupid and dive in headfirst. This brought me back to my current dilemma. The entire reason for me to train my earth mana was to have another card to play at hand. Though I had to admit, things were not going as planned. Earth mana was also more stubborn and harder to control for me. As I circled the mountain range, I subconsciously glanced at the sun that began to set. A sigh escaped my mouth as I turned back towards our floating mountain. I was no fool to think I could fight the tainted monster that lurks here after dark. The scene of my mother taking us home for the first time as the countless monsters crawled out of the mountain crevices still brings a chill down my spine. Mother may have handled them easily, but that did not mean I could do the same. Who knew what sort of monsters hid there? Hence why I did not want to push my luck and decided to head back. Now that I think about it, I can ask Enos to teach me how to control the earth element. I'm sure he wouldn't mind, I mumbled as a smile made its way across my face. By the time I reached home, the sun was hiding on the horizon, dyeing the sky orange. Essie was nowhere to be seen, so I guess she must have already gone back to the cave. Emmy wasn't by the entrance either. It was surprisingly Cidus who was standing there staring at the horizon with a lost look. I landed next to him as he turned around to glance at me. "Brother," he called out to me with a nod. I nodded back and replied, "Where's your nose?" Hearing my question, Cidus motioned towards the edge of the mountain as spoke. "He should be coming back any time soon." "He went out for a hunt?" I asked. A weird expression made its way to Cidus' face as replied, "No." He couldn't finish speaking as Enos's figure appeared flying towards us like an arrow. Boom! He landed with a loud boom, causing debris to rise as a small crater formed. Glancing at his palm, I instantly understood what Cidus' expression meant. There clasped in his hand was 2 dead fairies. Ah, I almost forgot about his habit, I inwardly noted with a shake of my head. Chapter 140, Solution. "Oh, brother!" enthusiastically called out Enos as he walked over towards us. Cidus nodded in acknowledgement and silently lowered his head in my direction before he jumped to the night sky, his dark figure blending in with his surroundings as it became almost impossible to distinguish it. Both me and Enos watched Cidus leave for a few seconds before he walked by my side with a wide grin on his face. He then spoke excitedly while showing me the 2 dead fairies in his palms. "Look, brother, the harvest today was plentiful. I managed to catch 2 little worms sneaking about," he said. A strange expression made its way to my face as I awkwardly glanced at the fairy corpses. Ever since that fateful encounter with that first fairy, Enos' hatred had never disappeared. Quite the opposite. Once he was able to effectively haunt the tiny creature, Enos turned it into a long life goal to exterminate any fairy he came across. I wouldn't be surprised if one day he suddenly drove them to extinction. Shaking my head, I asked, "Where do you even find them?" None of us had ever encountered one, yet somehow you got an entire miniature hill made of skulls inside. I was genuinely curious. None of us siblings had ever come across a fairy, only Enos seemed to have a knack for finding them. Scratching his head with his free arm, he thought for a second before replying, "I learned that it's easy if I follow the scent of the earth." "The scent of the earth?" I asked again, still confused. I think earth mana is a better explanation," he said, to which I remained silent as I waited for him to continue. He pointed at the dead fairies in his hand and explained, "These little pests have a distinctive smell." An earth mana smell," he said. It was apparent that he was having difficulties explaining it himself, yet I could still vaguely guess what he meant. The fairies should have a high affinity with earth mana, and with Enos' similarly high affinity, he is able to distinctively sense their presence. Perhaps this is the reason why he was targeted in the first place, and why none of us can find the fairies, I inwardly thought before absent-mindedly nodding towards him. "I see." Changing the subject, I motioned towards the corpses with my head and asked in curiosity, "So you are going to add those to your collection?" With beaming eyes, Enos nodded enthusiastically as he went on to demonstrate, "Yes, these ones should make a fine addition." He sounded quite pleased with himself. Before I could say anything, my scales tingled as I felt the earth mana stir in our surroundings. Right before my eyes, a green plant rose from the ground at an accelerated rate as it extended itself towards Enos's palm. He calmly allowed the plant's vines to wrap around the corpses. I watched over the whole ordeal in curiosity. Using my spirit vision, I was able to see the earth elements move as they covered the dead bodies, sucking something out of them. As if on cue, the dead bodies began to dry up, turning into mummies before even the skin disappeared. The veins, the blood, everything was sucked by the plant that seemed to grow even taller. Not long after, the fairies were no more, and in his palms, Enos held 2 tiny white skeletons. A frown made its way to my face as I watched the whole scene unfold. Although I saw Enos' trophy mountain of skulls, I never quite knew how he managed to deal with the bodies until today. Right before my eyes, with the help of my spirit vision, everything was crystal clear. What sucked? Whatever remained in the fairy corpses was not the plant itself, but the mana elements. Once they appeared, the plant appeared, and once they finished feasting on the corpses, the plant slowly shrank before it disappeared. Meanwhile, the elements moved and made their way towards Enos as they twirled around him before seeping beneath his yellow scales. Are those the tamed elements inside his soul space? I wondered. What was that? I curiously asked as Enos lovingly stroked the now shiny skulls. "You mean what I just did now, brother? That's easy. The pests come from the earth, and to the earth they shall return. I simply hasten the process," he explained with a grin. Interesting. I was honestly still quite lacking when it came to the uses of earth mana, hence why I came to Enos for help in the first place. Since he was the one with the highest affinity for it, naturally he would serve as the best teacher for me to improve my control over it. Or so I hoped. "Do you need anything else, brother?" he suddenly asked, snapping me back to my senses. I solemnly nodded before replying, yes, I need your help. My help? Hearing that, Enos's eyes suddenly lit up as he puffed his chest and subconsciously raised his head higher. Whatever it is that brother needs, you can definitely count on me, he said reassuringly. Seeing that, my mouth curled upwards as I explained, then, I'll be bothering you to teach me how to better control the earth mana. As soon as I said that, however, Enos's expression suddenly turned strange as he scratched his head awkwardly while avoiding eye contact. Sensing that something was wrong, I slowly asked, what's wrong? About that? I don't think I can be of much help, brother, he said with a hint of embarrassment. Why not? Confused, I asked again. The thing is, I'm not sure how I do it myself. The last part came out as nothing but a whisper, yet I was still able to hear it. Then how do you control your mana? With a shrug, he replied, I'm not sure, I just feel it. You just feel it? I repeated. Yes, it feels like. I don't know. Struggled for a while but still couldn't formulate his thoughts into words and so was forced to give up. This put me into a dilemma as I was now back in square one. I guess he does have a point. I mean, if it was me, how would I teach someone to control water mana? From one point of view, I was also simply feeling it. A long sigh escaped my mouth. It was then that Enos suddenly spoke up. Since brother wants to train his earth mana, why not hunt fairies? He said.